One of the questions that I get asked the most is, Attilio, how about we raise capital with European investors using our non-European funds like the Cayman Fund or the Delaware Fund? The topic of today's video is about the AIFMD national private placement regime and whether is it still worth it as an avenue in 2024. National private placement regimes before AIFMD was introduced were designed mainly as safe harbors or exemptions. The law of the various member states in Europe would provide for the type of investors that could be approached, the number of them, and the minimum investment size of the offer, and when managers complied to these requirements when approaching this investor, the offer was automatically exempted by the concept of public offer, and the offering documentation did not require to be registered with local authorities. With the advent of AIFMD, the national private placement regime became sort of public. And that is because AIFMD did introduce a public or a requirement of formality, if you like, whereby it is necessary to register the offering documentation of funds with local authorities in the various member states where funds are intended to be placed with investors. There have to be specific disclosure in the offering document, also according to the applicable European regulation on sustainable finance, and there are also fees to pay in certain cases. In certain member states, there are also additional requirements that are imposed, and this is a practice that is so-called gold plating. AIFMD has also introduced what we define as objective preconditions to the AIFMD national private placement regime. The objective conditions to the AIFMD national private placement regime are essentially two under the first version of AIFMD. So the third country jurisdictions where either the manager or the fund are located have to have entered into cooperation agreements with the corresponding authorities in the member states where the offer intends to take place. The second objective requirement introduced by AIFMD for the national private placement regime is the one whereby, again, the third country manager and the fund are not located in a jurisdiction that is included in the blacklist run by the Financial Action Task Force or FATF. The AIFMD II, which is being published as we speak and will enter into force and application sometime by 2025, has changed again the objective precondition to the AIFMD national private placement regime. Whilst the precondition of the cooperation under the AIFMD national private placement regime has not been changed by AIFMD II, the one of the non-presence of blacklists at European level has been slightly amended, because basically now it's no longer the blacklist run by the FATF, but it's another European list of countries that are considered as high risk. In addition to having changed the second objective precondition, AIFMD II has also introduced an additional objective precondition for the AIFMD national private placement regime. And this is another characteristic of the domicile, another condition imposed on the domicile outside of Europe where either the manager or the fund is based. In this case, these jurisdictions should not be considered non-cooperative for tax purposes. The list of non-European countries that are considered non-cooperative for tax purposes is updated sort of a couple of times a year, and the Cayman Island for a very short period of time went on that list a few years back. And so what is interesting in this change to the objective preconditions of the AIFMD national private placement regime as introduced by AIFMD II is that we insert a moving element, a moving part in the dynamic and the mechanism of the AIFMD national private placement regime, which makes it an even less appealing and convincing avenue to raise capital with investors in Europe using non-European funds. So what is the verdict? Is the AIFMD national private placement regime still worth it in 2024? There are increasingly less arguments in support of the AIFMD national private placement regime being the best way and the most efficient way to raise capital with European investors. Generally, this route had already its hurdles, costs and challenges, because to the contrary of a European fund that can have exposure to investors throughout the entire EU 27 thanks to the passport, the AIFMD national private placement regime is confined as a country-by-country exercise, and so you will have to apply with the different authorities separately of each of the member states where you intend to privately place these funds. Of course, the fact that AIFMD II has also introduced this additional objective precondition, which looks at the cooperation on tax matters of certain countries, in a way has made AIFMD private placement regime even a riskier route, because there might be a growing perception issue with European investors which might be biased towards European funds rather than non-European offshore funds. Once again, if you made it to the end of this video, I wanted to invite you again to subscribe to this channel and hit like to this video. There is more to come about the European fund business. Stay tuned.